In this video, I'm gonna show you how you can make some big country style drums using Addictive Drums 2. Now, when using Addictive Drums, you basically have two options to do this. Now, the first option is to simply load the plugin on a channel and do all the processing and channel routing and all of that inside the plugin. The plugin is really capable of doing that. But in this video, I'm gonna do a little bit more advanced technique. Now, Addictive Drums has channels for all its drums, including the different mics, which is the overhead, the room, and then also the bass processing. And if you click on these little arrows that go down here, you can route them out, which is called a multi-out. And I did this here in my Ableton session, and you can see this is where Addictive Drums is on, and all these channels, which have these orange arrows, get routed to the kick, to the snare, to the hi-hats, to the overhead, to the room, and to the bass. The advantage of that is that you can use your own plugins to process them instead of being limited to the options that you have on these channels here. We're gonna start with these drums here. We have this Gretsch kick drum here, we have the Ludwig snare, and that's pretty much it for the basic groove. If I play that back now, sounds a little bit different to what you hear in the intro of the song. Now, to beef this up, we're gonna need some processing, and we're also gonna layer in some additional sounds. First of all, we're gonna start off with the kick drum, and this is just one of my favorite plugins to use on drums, especially on kick drums and on snares. The Pultec EQ just adds a really nice low end. You can hear the kick sounds instantly bigger, and then I added a little bit of, I mean, it's not a little bit, it's quite a lot of saturation, giving it a nice oomph. And then I'm shortening the kick using a volume LFO. And I'm just shortening that. Now, whenever a kick sits really well in the mix, it's usually because it's very tight and short. Most kicks are just simply too long, and this is why I'm cutting out that ringing sound of it. Now, for the snare, I'm using saturator, decapitator, and a gate, and that makes sure that whenever the kick hits, I don't get too much of that noise from the snare, which is picked up. And then I'm also having a shorter room reverb, so everything just becomes a little bit more tight, and I'm just controlling everything basically more. You can see with the kick, I also use the volume LFO to shorten the kick. I'm doing the same with the snare, because if the drums don't ring out that long, I get much more control over them. Now, a great technique, which is always working fantastic with live drums, is if you add in samples. Sounds pretty shitty, but it really helps with the snare. And then I have a DMX drum machine snare here. These two together help the drums quite a lot. This is without, and this is with. It's just buzzing a little bit more out and just smashes a little bit harder. Now, for the hi-hats, I used a different instance of Addictive Drums. We're gonna come to that in a second. Let's first have a look at the overhead and the room mic. And you can see on both of these, I'm using a overdrive. And this is just so nice because it brings up the tone so much. Let's listen to them in solo. Just a little bit more crunchy and buzzy. Same with the room mic. Listen to this. It just pulls up a little bit more, and then I'm also filtering out the low end because I don't want it to interfere with the main drums. Now let's get over, there's these wood sticks. Now let's have a look how I did these. You can hear they sound really bright, and they sound like they're recorded with a great mic, but I wanted that more dirty and dark tone out of them. And so what I like to use for that is RC20 Retro Color. It's just a vinyl preset, and I'm cutting that a little bit here on the frequencies. A little bit darker. Now with the rabbit tape from Safari Pedals, you can hear how much darker it becomes, and I'm using the mix knob on 50%. This is great for making things just a little bit more tasteful, characterful, and a little bit more dark. Finally, I'm using one of my favorite transient shapers from Newfangled Audio, and I'm emphasizing the first 150 milliseconds of every transient just by a little bit. just becomes more attacky. Now for the hi-hats, I have open and closed hi-hats laid together. This is a little bit unrealistic because usually on the drum set you cannot do that. However, I felt like this was needed for the sound, the way I wanted to approach this. So I have these closed hats, and again I'm using RC20 retro color to make them just a little bit darker. This is how they usually sound. And you can see I'm giving it this lo-fi effect, making it a little bit darker. Then we also have some open hats. And this is like a really nice element to have in a chorus. When everything opens up, you want to have a bright sound throughout the chorus. In EDM music, we use white noise to achieve this sound, and a lot of hi-hats. Like in country, you can do like these open hi-hats. Again, I'm using some processing here just to get them darker. Usually from Addictive Drums, the hi-hats are just too bright for my taste. You can hear they're super bright. I'm adding RC20 retro color and EQ drum bus and my transient shaper. So everything I'm doing with these drums is basically giving them a more darker tone that blends all well together. Now if we add all of this to the drums, closed hats, just help with the groove a little bit more. We just get a really nice open chorus style groove. Now let's get over to the bus processing. If you just throw OTT on a sound, it's always doing way too much. And there's something really special with OTT that whenever you put it on something, it adds that little bit of extra punch. I love to use it on kicks and on snares at really low settings. It's a little bit difficult to hear because it's lower in volume, but everything becomes a little bit more tight. But you can hear now some of the low end is missing. And for that, Gorilla Drive by Safari pedals is an incredible option. You can see I'm barely using it. It's 0.5, it's 5% mix. But you're gonna hear, you need headphones for this, but you're gonna hear how much of a difference it's gonna make. It makes a real like boom in the low end here. Now this is probably on almost every drum sound I made over the past 5 months. Ableton's drum bus is just a cheat code to get your drums to smash through the roof. Listen to this. Now the punch it creates is just so unique and it works on almost every drum sound. You just have to be careful with the dry and wet. I usually use very low values here, and I'm also emphasizing the transient a little bit here with this transient module, a little bit of saturation in here with the drive knob. Now finally I'm adding some bloom here. This is just balancing out a little bit the frequency spectrum, and it's also compressing it a little bit. It just sounds much more even. Now here's a really cool trick, and I did this with this 80s gated reverb rack here. Now I'm using a reverb rack on the entire drum bus. However, it's only triggered when the snare plays. And I'm using a gate that opens whenever this DMX snare here plays. So it basically just opens whenever the snare plays. This is after. You can hear that the snare just smashes a little bit harder. Finally, there's a little bit of clipping just to match everything together. It's just really minimal. There's not that much happening really. Finally, I'm just using a little bit of drum bus compression here on 33%. Yeah, and that's how you make some big country drums. One little thing here, the crash. This is actually a really cool technique. So it's not just the crashes here, I have a bus, and the reason for that is I have a dark crash and I have a bright crash. Now I first want to play them for you. So this is the dark crash and that's the bright one here. So they're very different in their characteristics, and this is why they complement each other so nice. Now here's a trick what I'm gonna do with this. Now on the dark one, I'm using a auto pan at a really slow rate. Let's play that back and you're gonna notice the crash is gonna move in the stereo image around. Now what I can do now, I can copy this thing, paste it over to the bright crash, and I'm just changing the phase. So it's basically on the exact opposite side of each other. Now when they're playing like this back and forth. And this way, you just get a really nice stereo crash. Amazing, right? Now that's it for today's video. If you want to have these drums as well as 27 other drum kits based off popular pop hits of the past years, then you can find a link in the description. And thanks for watching.